In this video, I will be going over the T12 tab of the MSA Analyzer. Within the T12 tab, this is where you'll be able to run analysis on the properties profit and loss statement, also called the T12 statement. When you click into the T12 tab of the MSA Analyzer, there's a couple sections I want to highlight. The first section when you first get into the tab is the input section. In this section, you will be pasting the T12 data that you receive from the broker. Most T12s that you receive from the broker will follow a similar format. The line items being on the first column, followed by 12 months worth of data. When inputting your data into the T12 tab of the MSA Analyzer, always make sure to paste as values only. This T12 input section of the MSA Analyzer has been designed for the user to input a dataset up to about 1,000 line items, just shy of 1,000. That means if you receive a T12 statement from a broker that has about 990 lines, you should be able to copy and paste as values only into this input section of the T12. The next section of the T12 tab is the annualized table. This is an output only section, and once you start pasting your data and going through your mapping, which we will do in a second, your T12 mapping, that data will be automatically calculated. The analyzer will show you your annualized data for the T1, T2, T3, all the way to your T12 annualized data. The second table shows you the data mapping error. In order to complete the T12 analysis on the MSA Analyzer, we will be using a process called data mapping, which we'll go over in a few minutes. As you complete that data mapping, this table, the data mapping error check, will be able to check to make sure that the different line items of the T12 file that you pasted into the analyzer were mapped correctly. If there are any errors, then you have X marks here to indicate that there's an error with your data mapping process. Right next to the analyzed data, we also have a section for the broker performer. Sometimes when you're doing your analysis and you look in the OM, the brokers may have done their performer. You can copy that data on here just so you can compare your analysis to the broker's performer. The last section of the T12 tab is your month-to-month historical analysis, which is just a summary of the T12 data inputted in the input section. It groups all the line items into the high-level categories based on your mapping. On this table, you can easily see month-over-month trends, see how the income is going, compare the monthly expense ratios from month to month, and trend your net operating income from one month to the next. Before we copy our T12 data into the MSA Analyzer, please remember that we have a detailed step-by-step instructions on how to clean the T12 data and input that information into the MSA Analyzer on the MSA tutorial PDF document provided to you. When you are ready to copy your T12 data over into the MSA Analyzer, just open the T12 that you received from the broker. This is an example of a T12 document that we received from one of our brokers from one of the properties that we're analyzing back in November 2023. And for most T12s, like I stated, they will follow this similar format where you have the line items followed by 12 months worth of data with the most recent month all the way at the end. And if you look at our T12 input section of the MSA Analyzer, we have to make sure that the data that we paste into the analyzer follows this order. So that's the line items and 12 months worth of data with the most recent month all the way at the end, which is very similar to the file that we received. And to just make sure that we have 12 months worth of data, you can select the month at the top, look at the count, and it's 12 months. Similar to the rent roll, whenever I receive a T12 document from a broker, the first thing that I do is create a duplicate of that file. Right click on the tab name or the sheet name, move or copy, click to move to N, create a copy. That creates a duplicate of that file. I select the entire sheet. You can do Control A or click on the space between A and 1, column A or row 1. Go to Home. Make sure I unmerge any cells. Right click on the column bar and select Unhide. This is to ensure that if there are any hidden columns, they become visible. The next thing is we want to copy that data. So right click copy and paste it over itself as values only. So you can go to paste special and paste as values only. That way, if there are any built-in formulas, you can overwrite those formulas with what the content of that cell itself. Our data is clean, and all we have to do is copy that data over to the MSA Analyzer. If you look at your MSA Analyzer, you can see that the information needed are the line items and the 12 months worth of data. The analyzer itself will calculate the total, so we do not need to copy the total column over. And to copy, we start from the title that includes the month. So we copy this all the way from the top, including the month for the different columns. And we're copying only up to the last month, not including the total. So I'll go all the way to the last cell of the last column, excluding the total. I can hit Control C to copy. Go into my T12 tab of the MSA Analyzer. Right click and always remember to paste as values only. That is important and very critical to ensure that the analyzer functions as designed. Go to paste special and paste values. And one of the reasons that we paste as values only is that this T12 tab of the MSA Analyzer, particularly this section, this input sections, has some built-in formatting designs that will automatically highlight outliers for each of the line items. And that's what you're seeing here with all the yellows. So the analyzer looks at each line items, looks all the way across all 12 months. And if there are any outliers for any of the line items, it highlights it as an outlier. And the way it determines if it's an outlier is if there's a value on the line that's at least 1.5 standard deviation away from the mean. So highlight that particular cell on that row as an outlier. What I do when I paste my T12 data is I quickly glance through the entire data to see what the different outliers are, and if there's anything that I need to follow up with a broker, the property owner, or my PM, I'll reach out to them to get more information. For example, if we looked at maintenance, super labor, you can see in this month, April 2003, there was a significant charge. Seems like a one-time charge. So that just brings it to your attention that there was an outlier. And if it's something that's critical to your analysis, then you want to bring it up to the property manager or the broker to get some clarification. With the T12 data pasted into your MSA Analyzer, we have to go through a process called mapping. Mapping is a process by which we look at all the different line items of the P&L statement and assign them a particular code. Based on that code, the analyzer will be able to perform an analysis and group all the line items that have an identical code. And these codes are based on the high-level categories for income and expenses. If we look at our annualized table, we can see that we've broken up the income and the expense line items into some high-level categories. And for a majority of multifamily properties, the income and the expense line items will fall under one of these categories. And for each of these categories, for example, the gross potential income, the loss to lease, we've assigned a specific label. So the process of mapping will be going through these different line items and seeing how we can categorize them to fit into our high-level income and expense categories. For expenses, we will be looking through the different line items in our expense section and assigning them these different labels. Anything that has to do with marketing will be assigned the label mark. Anything that was cable or internet will be assigned the label cable. Anything that has to do with repair and maintenance will be assigned RM for repair and maintenance. So what I do is I start from the first line item and work my way down all the way to the bottom. As we map these different line items, starting from the top all the way to the bottom, the analyzer would automatically perform the annualized analysis for the T1, T2, all the way to the T12, as well as the month-over-month analysis, grouping all those line items into these high level income and expense categories. In order to facilitate the mapping process as we go through the different line items, what I usually do is I click the negative sign at the top, which collapses all these months, all these data, so I can easily see what that line item is as I go through my mapping. So starting with the first one, the first line item is your gross potential income. And if we look at the gross potential income, we have the label rent assigned to gross potential income. So I will label this rent. The next line item is loss to lease or gain to lease. And if we look at our loss or gain to lease, we have the label loss to lease assigned to it. So I can either just type LTL, or I can also use my drop down and select loss to lease. For totals, we do not need to label the totals because the totals is just the sum of the rent and the loss to lease. If you label the total, then you're double counting the data that was already labeled prior. The next line items of our vacancy loss. So if we go into our table and look at vacancy, we can see that the label assigned to vacancy is VAC. So we can type in VAC, or you can also select from the drop-down menu. The loss to staff, that is considered non-revenue. This occurs if you have a member of the staff or multiple members of the staff living at the property, getting a discount or not paying any rent. That's considered a non-revenue. And non-revenue, the label is NR, so we can type NR here or select NR from the drop-down menu. And you continue to do this for all the income and expense line items. So if we quickly get through that, the next is bad debt. This is bad debt, bad debt. Police unit, that's considered a non-revenue. It's like a staff living at the property for a discounted rent. So that's non-revenue. Rent concessions, if we look, concessions is just CONC. That's concessions. As you can see, as we're going through the process of mapping the different line items, our analyzer is automatically calculating the analyzed data for the T1 all the way to the T12, as well as the month-over-month income data based on the information that we've mapped thus far. Total adjusted residential rent, that's just the total. We already mapped the items within this category, so we do not need to map the total. The total rental income is just the sum of all of these items that have been mapped. This is the other income section. Non-revenue is just admin fees, that's other income. Applications, that's other income. Late fees, other income. Month to month is other income. Non-sufficient funds, that's other income. Termination is other income. Fees, transfer is other income. And again, I'm using the other income label here. If it falls into one of these categories, then I'll label them using these labels. But for these other income, they will all fall into other income for all these fees. Income interest, that's just other income. Laundry, that's your washer and dryer income. We do have a label for washer and dryer, so I can name this WD rubs. Income other, I can do other income. Pest control, for pest control we have the label as P rubs, so I can select P rubs from my drop down menu under the other income section. So that's P rubs. Other income bad debt, that's bad debt. Other income pet rent, that's other income. Other income bad debt reserves, that's bad debt. I labeled the incorrect thing, so it gives you an error if you put in the wrong label. In this, so other income bad debt, that's BD, that's bad debt. Damages is just other income. Eviction charge, that's other income. Utility reimbursement gas, if we look at gas and electric utility reimbursement, that's GE rubs. So GE rubs. Electricity, that's GE rubs. Utility fees, that's just other income. Utility reimbursement trash, if we look at trash reimbursement, that's T rubs, so I can label this T rubs. Water sewer reimbursement is W rubs. What if I mistyped this like I did a few minutes ago? If I, instead of doing W rubs, what if I did U rubs? You can see that the analyzer gives you an error and say, please select a label from the drop down menu. And the reason is because UW rubs is not one of the options on the drop down menu. So if we go into the other income section, you can see it's W rubs, not UW rubs. Renter's insurance, that's just other income. And the total other income, we already mapped the individual items in here, so we do not need to map the total. There could be a scenario, and we will see with the expense section, where all these categories have the same label, and rather than assigning a label to each one of those subcategories, you can just go directly to the label and assign it as other income. For example, if everything here within this category was considered other income as OI, not broken down into washer and dryer rubs, pest control rubs. If all of this, you were going to label it as other income or OI, what you could have done is just go directly to the total other income and label this one line item as other income. And that should do as well. The analyzer should be able to pick that up and use the total. The last step of our analysis when it comes to the income section is the validation. There are 3 symbols that are used to validate to make sure you map your data correctly. That's the EGI, the expense, and the NOI. These 3 labels are used for validation purposes only. So you would assign the EGI on the effective gross income line, the expense on the expense line, and the NOI on the NOI line. And that would be used to validate if the mapping was done correctly. We just completed the input section, and as you can see, all the input information have been categorized into this high-level table for the annualized data, as well as the month-over-month table for the month-over-month data. For our validation purposes, because this is the total income line, we will be using EGI, and you can also select that from the drop-down menu. And if your mapping was done correctly, then this validation should all show check marks from the first month all the way to the last month. Let's take, for example, you were doing your mapping and you got too excited because you wanted to get to the expense section that you omitted this last other income. Say we left this out. You can see that the analyzer now gives you an error indicating that there was an error with the mapping. So if you relabel that other income, now it shows check marks. What if you mislabel an income item as an expense item? What if instead of labeling this other income, for some reason you label it admin? What happens? You can see the data now shows in the admin section of your annualized table, as well as your month-over-month table, but your data mapping error check table indicates that there is an error. So there was an error with your mapping. So you just have to go back and re-verify that you mapped all the line items correctly. If I change that back to other income, you can see that the error check now looks fine and there are no errors. Now moving on to expenses is the same process. These are the expense high level items, and we're just assigning labels based on these labels that we've designated for these high level categories. Expenses tend to be a little bit easier because rather than doing the individual line items, sometimes you can just label the high level or the total row. This is operating expenses, payroll. We can see all of this is payroll. So I can go to this section and label all of this as payroll, which is just pay. The label is pay. So I can label all of this as pay. So let's see for this. Let's start by doing that. Repair and maintenance payroll. All of this is payroll as well. I can label all of this payroll, or I can just select it from the drop down menu. As an alternative, I could have just come directly to the total section and just label this as pay, but we can do that in the next section. For example, admin. With admin, I can label everything within this admin category as admin. So that's from here all the way here, or I can just come directly to the total admin and label that as admin. So that's one way of doing it. But the only way this works is if every line item within that category would have received the same label. If for whatever reason you did not want to label everything within this category as admin, then you wouldn't assign admin to that total. And speaking of, as we're looking at this data, I can see that they added the management fee within the admin section, which is not typical. Usually you want to separate the management fee from the admin budget. So in this case, I'll get rid of that admin just to show you what this looked like on the table. Let's see. We had this data for admin in our expense section, but because I want the management fee to be separate from the admin category, I'll take this off. And the easiest way, I just label everything within that admin. This is just a faster way of doing it. And I go into my admin line item, and I go into my management fee line item, because this is the only one I want to change. And I look through my expense categories, and for property management fee, the label is PM. So I come back to my management fee, and I'll change this to PM. Now it breaks down that admin into two categories: the admin, which is your true admin cost, as well as the property management fee. Moving on to the next category, this is marketing. All of this I would have labeled marketing, so I would just go to the total and label marketing, and that mark is the label that we have assigned to marketing, advertising and marketing. The next is repair and maintenance. You can label all of this repair and maintenance, or if you want to break down your contract services from your repair and maintenance, you can label the categories within that total and go to the specific line items you want to relabel. For example, this is landscape. We do have categories for landscape as well as contract services. So contract is CONT and landscape is just land. If I want to keep this as land, I can just label that landscape supplies. I can keep it as land. That way I have a category for landscape. Turnover costs, this is all turnover expenses. I can just keep that as turnover. Utilities is broken up, so we have different labels for the different utilities. We have the water and sewer, we have gas and electric, and we have trash. So we just have to make sure we assign those specific labels. Electricity is GE, gas is GE, it's the same thing, common area GE. Water, waste remover, that's just trash. And again, I'm using these labels where the gas and electric is GE, waste removal trash is trash, and water and sewer is water. This is another waste removal, so that's trash. Water and sewer is water. Utility processing fee, this is an admin cost. So you can label that as admin. Late fees, that's an admin cost. You can label that as admin. We do not need to label the total because we've already labeled the categories within this section. So all these, if you were to sum up these categories, it will make up the total. Lastly, we have insurance, which is insurance, and that's the label from our table. Property taxes is tax. Other taxes, that's just tax. If you want to verify that information, insurance is INS, taxes is just tax. And that's the total. You can skip that. And total operating expenses and NOI, remember that's our validation checks on our validation table, on our error check table. So that's the effective gross income, which we did for the income. For expenses is your EXP, and for NOI is NOI. Right now it's returning an error because we haven't assigned those validation labels. If I go into my total expenses, for expenses is EXP, and for net operating income, I can just select that. If my mapping was done correctly, if I look at my validation table, I should have all green check marks, which is what I have. If I had missed say on this expenses, I omitted that first expense line, it will return an error because this is indicating that I missed something when it came to my mapping. And it tells you by how much that the data mapped and the data pasted in your input table, by how much there is a discrepancy, and that's the total right here. If I go back and put a pay in here, now I have check marks. This mapping table, it helps to make sure you map your data correctly. And if you were to look at your annualized data, now you have all the information from your T1 annualized data all the way to your T12. In addition, the month-over-month data, which is a high-level summary of the T12 data that was pasted into this input section, will show you certain trends, how your gross potential income has been trending over time in the past 12 months. You can also see the effective gross income. You can see the month with the lowest effective gross income and the month with the highest, and see how that compares to the most recent months. You can also see the expense ratios. This is something that I like to look at to see how the property is being operated. Typically for a Class B property, you're looking anywhere from 40 to like 45%. It can even range sometimes to the high 40s, depending on how well managed that property is, as well as the NOI. So you can look at the NOI trends, look at the months with the highest NOI and the months with the lowest NOI. When it comes to the annualized data, it's important to look at your annualized expense ratio, because this will give you a better idea how that property has been operated over the past 12 months. If we're looking at the T12 at 45%, which is what you would expect for a Class B property. And one thing that I forgot to mention, a couple of areas on this section, on this input section, as I'm going through my mapping and mapping the different line items, is this per unit cost. Because these are your projections when you're doing your pro forma analysis. For the markets that you're familiar with, I already have an idea, for example, in this case, how much payroll should be. So when I'm doing my analysis and I see the total payroll per unit per year is $1,500, I know in my market that can be anywhere from $1,500 to $1,000. So immediately I know that that payroll is within the rule of thumb of what I should expect for that market. And the same applies to admin. If I had looked this admin total, the first thing that would have came to mind is this is too high. But the reason this is too high is because the property management fee was included in this admin category. But again, it gives you an idea and provides you with more insights that can help with your future projections. Repair and maintenance cost, this is $729. This seems a little bit high, but I want to look now deeper, looking at those outliers. So these are the highlighted in yellow, to see what is throwing off this repair and maintenance and why is it so high. I would expect anywhere from $350 to $500 for this property of this age. So I will look more into it, and if I had any questions, I can just make a note. So this is your comment section. This is what I like to follow up. I can just type a note here that says follow up with broker regarding repair and maintenance cost. So that's something that I want to follow up with a broker. If I were looking through, let's see if we can find any outliers. It seems like they had a significant bad debt in the month of December 2022. If you wanted to inquire more about that, you can say inquire about bad debt from December 2022 broker. So these notes are just reminders to me as I'm doing my underwriting, so I can reach out to the broker to get more clarification, get more information. So I have all the details that I need in order to come up with my projections for my underwriting. And this doesn't stop there. As I previously mentioned, a lot of the stuff that you do from one tab within the MSA Analyzer flows into the other tab to help facilitate your underwriting process. So all the data that we just pasted into this input section and came up with our annualized table, that data then flows into your pro forma tab. And within the pro forma tab, this is where you spend a majority of your time doing your analysis, but you have easy access to that data, that annualized table, where you can easily look at different periods. If I wanted to look at the historicals on a T12 basis, I can just select T12 for the income and T12 for the expenses. And if I wanted to look at a property on a T3 basis, let's say T1 over T12, then I can select that from the drop-down menu. This historical information is pulled directly from this annualized table. So it helps makes the underwriting process so much easier and so much smoother. So now when I'm coming up with my year 0 analysis, I can easily compare how that property has been doing historically to come up with my analysis. Going back to the T12 tab, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, we have detailed step-by-step instructions on how to input the T12 data into your MSA Analyzer. Please see the MS Analyzer tutorial, which is a PDF file, and it will walk you through the process for inputting your data into this T12 tab. If you have any additional questions, please reach out to us on our website by going to www.msanalytica.com.